Juliet,
Mommy,
a village
now
girl
that
with a
the storm
quiet
has
grace,
destroyed our
is
home,
forced to flee
we
to the
just have to
chaotic
go and try
city
a
with
new
her
life
widowed
in the
mother,
city.
Angela, after a
Run,
ruthless
run
storm
quickly!
destroys their
My
home.
baby, hold on!
To survive, Juliet walks the dusty streets with a heavy basin
The
of
house
fruit,
is falling!
her beauty remaining untouched by the city. Her life takes a sharp turn when she catches the eye of Charles, a disciplined billionaire CEO in a sharp crimson suit. While Charles finds a peace in Juliet that his world of diamonds cannot provide, a storm of rejection is brewing. His elitist mother and his arrogant fiancée, Kihinda, will stop at nothing to remove the fruit girl from their lives. But as a dark conspiracy begins to unfold, Charles and his father, Dominic, decide to set a trap that no one saw coming. When the unexpected finally happens, Juliet is faced with a choice that will either destroy her or change her destiny forever. If you're just tuning into this channel, please subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to share with your friends and family, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments section. The bus coughed out a final cloud of thick black smoke as it groaned to a halt at the edge of the city. Juliet stepped onto the pavement, her hand gripped tightly by Angela, whose eyes were filled with the haunting reflection of the home they had left in ruins. The village was a memory of mud and broken thatch, replaced now by a concrete jungle that roared with the sound of honking horns and aggressive merchants. The air was heavy with the smell of exhaust and burning rubber, a sharp contrast to the rain-washed earth of their past. They found refuge in a room no larger than a storage closet, tucked away in a building that seemed held together by hope and peeling paint. The walls were thin, echoing with the muffled arguments of neighbors and the relentless pulse of the streets. "We will not let the city swallow us, Juliet," Angela whispered, her voice trembling but firm as she unpacked their only remaining possession, a sturdy aluminum basin. Before the sun could fully crest the horizon the next morning, Juliet was at the market. She used their last few coins to buy oranges, pineapples, and watermelons, scrubbing them until they shone like jewels. With the heavy basin balanced expertly on her head, she stepped into the heat. The city was a battlefield where everyone was fighting to survive, and Juliet was its newest soldier. As she navigated the dusty junctions, dodging speeding cars and the wandering hands of rowdy men, her neck ached under the weight. Yet, her face remained a mask of quiet grace. She was a village girl lost in a sea of steel, unaware that amidst the chaos of the intersection, someone was watching her through the tinted glass of a luxury SUV, someone whose world was about to collide with her own. The city heat was a relentless weight, but Juliet stood tall at the bustling junction, her neck strained under the heavy aluminum basin of oranges and garden eggs. To the rushing crowd, she was just another part of the concrete landscape, a nobody in a faded dress. But Juliet's beauty was a quiet rebellion. Even with beads of sweat on her forehead, her skin glowed like polished bronze, and her eyes held a peace that the chaotic city could not steal. A sleek black SUV, darker than the night and polished to a mirror finish, began to crawl through the midday traffic. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of expensive leather, but Charles felt a strange restlessness. He was a man of cold numbers and iron discipline, dressed in a sharp crimson suit that signaled power and precision. He looked out the window, expecting to see the usual blur of desperation, but instead, his gaze locked onto Juliet. Time seemed to stutter as the vehicle drew level with her. Charles leaned forward, captivated by the way she moved, with a grace that didn't belong in the dust. He saw her adjust the basin, her slender arms trembling slightly from the weight, yet her expression remained serene. He had met queens of industry and women draped in diamonds, but none possessed the soft and innocent light he saw in this girl's eyes. As the traffic light turned green and the SUV began to pull away, Charles didn't look back at his phone. He watched Juliet in the side mirror until she was a tiny speck in the distance, unaware that his heart, once as guarded as his bank vault, had just encountered the one thing money could never buy. The sun beat down mercilessly on the city junction, but for Juliet, the heat of the pavement was nothing compared to the fire of humiliation. A wealthy customer, frustrated by a slight delay in change, had reached out and violently shoved the heavy aluminum basin from her head. Oranges tumbled like rolling gold into the gutter, staining themselves with the black city dust. The man spat a curse about clumsy village rats and sped off, leaving Juliet trembling as the crowd watched with cold indifference. Tears pricked her eyes as she dropped to her knees, her fingers shaking as she tried to salvage the fruit that represented her mother's only meal for the night. But then, the heavy roar of a luxury engine cut through the chaos. A sleek black SUV pulled to a sudden halt, blocking the flow of traffic. The door swung open, and out stepped Charles. In his sharp crimson suit, he looked like a king who had accidentally wandered into a battlefield. Ignoring the honking horns and the whispers of the onlookers, Charles did something that made the world stop. He didn't just offer money, he knelt. His expensive trousers pressed into the grime of the roadside as he began to gather the scattered oranges with his own hands. When he reached for the final piece of fruit, his hand brushed against Juliet's. She looked up, breathless, meeting his gaze. In his eyes, she didn't see the pity she expected, but a fierce, protective respect. "A queen should not have to carry her crown alone in the dirt," he whispered. In that moment, amidst the dust and the noise, the billionaire and the fruit seller were the only two people left in the world. The golden gates of the family mansion creaked open, but inside, the air was colder than the marble floors. Margaret sat in the sprawling living room, her eyes fixed on a photograph her private investigator had dropped on the mahogany table. It showed Charles, her only son and the heir to a global empire, kneeling in the dirt of a busy junction. He wasn't closing $1 million deal. He was helping a girl in a tattered dress pick up fallen oranges. When Charles walked in, still wearing the crimson suit that now bore a smudge of roadside dust, Margaret didn't greet him. She simply tapped the photo. "Is this what the CEO of this family's legacy has been reduced to?" she asked, her voice like a sharpened blade. "Scavenging in the mud with a common fruit seller?" Charles sighed, loosening his tie. "Her name is Juliet, Mother. And she has more dignity in her pinky finger than most people in our circle." The insult hit Margaret like a physical blow. She stood up, her expensive jewelry clinking with every predatory step she took toward him. "Dignity does not pay for private jets, Charles. This creature is a parasite. She sees a billionaire, not a man. She sees a ticket out of the gutter." "You don't know her," Charles countered, his jaw tightening. "I know her kind," Margaret hissed, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, ancient fire. "The lioness does not negotiate with the sheep. I have spent 30 years building this name, and I will not let a girl who smells of cheap citrus and poverty rot it from the inside." As Charles turned to leave, Margaret's voice followed him, low and promising. "Enjoy your little charity project while it lasts, son. Because I am going to make sure that girl regrets the day she ever looked up at your car." The war had begun. The scent of expensive French perfume filled the mahogany-paneled office, but it couldn't mask the stench of Kehinda's growing desperation. She slammed her designer handbag onto Charles's desk, her eyes flashing with a fire that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with pride. For weeks, she had heard the whispers. The billionaire heir was spending his afternoons at a dusty junction, not in boardrooms. "A fruit seller, Charles?" she spat, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You are dragging our names through the mud for a girl who smells of overripe oranges and poverty?" Charles didn't look up from his tablet immediately. When he finally raised his gaze, Kehinda saw a coldness there that terrified her. It was the look of a man who had finally found something authentic and realized everything else was a lie. "Juliet has more dignity in her smallest finger than you have shown in all the years I've known you, Kehinda," he said calmly. The mention of the name, Juliet, pushed Kehinda over the edge. She paced the room like a caged tigress, her gold jewelry jingling mockingly. She realized then that she wasn't just fighting a rival, she was fighting a shift in his soul. The roadside girl hadn't just captured his attention. She had offered him a piece that Kihinda's world of diamonds and social standing could never replicate. "This is a mistake you won't recover from," Kihinda hissed, leaning over his desk, her face inches from his. "My mother and Margaret will never allow a commoner to sit on your throne." Charles simply stood up, adjusting his crimson suit jacket. "The throne is mine to share, Kihinda. And for the first time, I found someone who doesn't want the crown, just the man beneath it." As he walked past her, Kihinda realized with a sinking heart that he was slipping away into a world she couldn't understand and a love she couldn't buy. The sun was beginning to set, casting long bruised shadows over the city streets as Juliet finished her sales for the day. Her mother, Angela, had gone ahead to their small room, leaving Juliet to navigate the thinning crowds alone. As she turned into the narrow alleyway that served as a shortcut, the air suddenly grew heavy, as if another storm was brewing, but this one didn't come from the clouds. A tall figure stepped out from behind a stack of rusted shipping crates. He wore a dark hoodie, his face obscured by a black mask that left only his cold, predatory eyes visible. Juliet froze, the empty aluminum basin on her head rattling slightly as she began to tremble. Before she could scream, the man moved with the speed of a cobra, pinning her against the damp brick wall. He didn't reach for her money or her tray. Instead, he leaned in close, the scent of stale tobacco and malice radiating from him. "Listen well, village rat," he hissed, his voice a low, jagged rasp. "The junction isn't a place for you to hunt for what doesn't belong to you. Some men are like the sun. If you fly too close, you get burned to ashes." He pressed a cold, blunt object against her ribs, making her breath hitch in her throat. "Stay away from Charles. Stay away from people's husbands and focus on your rotten oranges. If we see your face near that SUV again, you and your mother won't live to see the next sunrise." He pushed her away with such force that she stumbled into the dirt. By the time Juliet scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her chest like a trapped bird, the masked man had vanished into the deepening gloom, leaving her alone with a terror that no village storm could ever match. Dominic sat in his sprawling study, the amber glow of the fireplace dancing across his weathered face. He had watched his son, Charles, torn between the expectations of high society and the pure, unyielding light he had found in Juliet. Across from him, Charles paced like a caged lion, his crimson suit jacket discarded, his mind heavy with the threats Kihinda and his mother had leveled against the girl he loved. Dominic cleared his throat, the sound sharp enough to stop Charles in his tracks. "A man in your position cannot afford to be blind, my son," Dominic began, his voice like gravel. "You believe you know who loves you, and who loves your name. But the truth only reveals itself when the gold is gone and the blood is thin." Charles frowned, leaning against the mahogany desk. "What are you suggesting, father?" Dominic leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with a calculated brilliance. "We will stage a crisis. A medical emergency so dire that money cannot solve it. We will tell the world your kidneys are failing, and that only a living donor, one who truly loves you, can save your life." Charles felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air in the room. He thought of Kihinda, who spoke of their future in terms of mergers and mansions, and then he thought of Juliet, who had nothing but her fruit basin and her mother's prayers. "It is a dangerous gamble," Charles whispered. Dominic nodded slowly, a grim smile touching his lips. "It is the only gamble worth taking. By tomorrow, the news will break. We will see who runs toward you to give, and who runs away to keep what they have. It is time to see if your treasure is made of glass or solid gold." The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and looming death. Charles lay behind the glass of the intensive care unit, his face pale, connected to machines that beeped like a fading pulse. Dominic stood by the door, his face a mask of calculated grief as he delivered the news to the two women waiting there. "The doctors say his kidneys are failing," he whispered, his voice cracking perfectly. Unless someone close to him, someone who claims to love him, is a match, we might lose him tonight. Kehinda stepped back, her designer handbag clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes, usually sharp with arrogance, were now wide with a different kind of intensity, self-preservation. "A kidney," she stammered, her voice rising in a panicked pitch. I am an only child, Dominic. My mother would never allow me to mutilate my body. I have my modeling career, my health, my future. I can't live on one kidney just because of a tragedy." Without looking back at the man she had claimed she couldn't live without, she turned her heels and fled down the hallway, the frantic clicking of her shoes echoing the rhythm of her betrayal. In the silence she left behind, Juliet moved forward. Her eyes were swollen with tears that hadn't stopped falling since she arrived. While Kehinda had counted the cost of her beauty, Juliet only saw the man who had knelt in the dust to help a fruit seller. She didn't ask about the pain or the scars. She grabbed Dominic's hand, her voice trembling but certain. "Take mine," she sobbed, her heart laid bare. "I have nothing to give him but my life. If my kidney can make his heart beat again, then take it. Please, just save him." In that moment, the fruit girl stood taller than the heiress, unaware that her sacrifice was the final key to a golden door. The sterile white walls of the hospital ward felt like a sanctuary as Charles took Juliet's hands in his. The unexpected storm of the loyalty test had passed, leaving behind a truth that no amount of gold could buy. With his father, Dominic, watching proudly from the doorway, Charles sank to one knee. "Juliet," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "you offered me your life when everyone else only cared for my lifestyle. I don't want a queen defined by a crown. I want a woman defined by her heart." As he slipped a diamond ring onto her finger, the heavy basin she once carried seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the weight of a promise. The door creaked open, and Charles's mother entered. The cold, elitist fire in her eyes had been extinguished by shame. She looked at Juliet, not as a village rat, but as the savior of her son. "I judged you by the dust on your feet," she said, her voice trembling. "But your soul is purer than any of us. Please, forgive a mother who was blinded by pride." Juliet, ever the woman of grace, simply nodded and took her hand, mending the fractured family with a single touch. Weeks later, the city stood still for a wedding that defied every social boundary. Juliet walked down the aisle, her beauty radiating a light that outshone the crystal chandeliers. Beside her stood Angela, no longer a struggling widow, but a mother whose sacrifice had finally borne fruit. As Charles lifted Juliet's veil, the crowd cheered for a love that had survived the storm. The fruit seller had become a bride, proving that destiny doesn't crown those with the most money, but those with the most love.